Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. I'm Jimmy. You can call me Jimmy or Jimmy, one of the three easiest things. I'm here with a great writer from his works on Avengers: No Surrender and No Road Home to Conan the Barbarian.
Yeah.
Jim's up. How you doing?
Hey, how's it going?
Not too bad, man. Black Friday, Thanksgiving. It all worked out. How was your Thanksgiving?
So up here in Canada, we had Thanksgiving last month. And so it's weird because like Thanksgiving kind of works out in a fun way for me where during Canadian Thanksgiving, I tell all my American clients, like, don't bother me because I got Thanksgiving. And then during American Thanksgiving, they don't bother me because they're on holiday. So it's like I get two Thanksgivings, little break, you know.
It's awesome.
All right. Yeah.
Oh man. So any big plans coming up? Like anything with your students? Because I know you're a teacher. Like
just trying to wrap up the term. You know, I think we're all feeling a little crispy on the edges. So I'm trying to just get through the last couple of weeks of classes and then head into the holidays, have a bit of downtime, spend more time with my wife, do some cooking, hang out, play some video games, just kind of try and ease out of the rest of 2020.
What do you play?
I've all sorts of stuff. I just got a PS5, and so I'm excited to have it, but I haven't had much chance to play. So I've been playing some Miles Morales and Demon Souls, but I still have a ways to go yet, and not enough time to really dig in.
So there's a little Easter egg in Miles Morales that you'll be able to do. You can turn into a heater lamp sort of thing.
I thought that was a glitch that was in the someone showed. I wasn't sure that it was an actual feature.
That was real.
No, I think it's a glitch that someone accidentally set off. I saw that weird thing. I don't know if they'll make it now a thing because it's become kind of an internet meme, but we shall see.
It should be.
So many people sent that to me. They were like, "Did you see? Have you done this?" I'm like, "No." Yeah, I think it's just probably going to get patched out. You know, these kinds of weird things that show up in games.
Yeah,
nowadays.
Brian was like, Brian said, he goes, "This is now canon."
It has to be. Yeah, really. You know.
All right. So how'd you get into comics? Because I don't know your origin.
Oh, okay. Like in terms of making comics or reading comics?
Yes.
Okay. Well, reading comics is pretty simple. I've gone through multiple phases of comic fandom. Grew up, started reading comics like I was 7, 8 years old, probably, you know, like the typical whatever, read the comic strip in the newspaper kind of stuff, reading Garfield's and whatever. But in terms of like comic book collecting, got into the original G.I. Joe comic book series that Marvel put out because I liked the toys when I was quite young. And then that got me into Spider-Man. I was reading, you know, I used to read, there was a thing called The Electric Company. It was this little kids magazine, and they had like a Spider-Man comic in most of the issues. And so I liked Spider-Man and I watched the cartoons and stuff. But I started collecting Amazing Spider-Man really hardcore. And then my brother really got into superhero stuff. And we just started collecting as much of the Marvel universe as we could afford.
Awesome.
Just buy up. Joe, my brother, would get like X-Men and almost all the mutant titles. I would get like Fantastic Four and Avengers and Spider-Man. And then we would sort of take turns. Sometimes Joe would buy Thor and Hulk, and sometimes I would buy them. And just like whatever grab bag stuff looked cool on top of our regular subscriptions. And then we got really obsessed with this thing called the Official Handbook of the Marvel Universe, which codifying all this stuff like a big encyclopedia. And I would read it and reread it and obsess over it and try and track down like first appearances of obscure characters and pine over back issues I couldn't afford and just like crazy stuff like that. You know, it was a different time because you didn't have access to everything like you do now digitally. And then, you know, over time you phase out of it. So I phased out of superheroes and started getting into more indie stuff. And then like Vertigo books. And then I went through a phase where I was reading all kinds of manga. And this was like pre kind of the manga explosion that we saw many years later. Like the manga I was reading, most of it was not officially translated. Like it was like fan translations on the earliest versions of the internet.
Oh, wow.
And so you would literally look at a printed out translation off your dot matrix printer while you were looking at the Japanese comic. And you'd be like, okay, Oh, that guy hates that guy. Oh, that guy's name is a pun for bread. All right. Like just weird stuff, and really enjoying it, but, you know, kind of digging into that stuff and seeing the depth and breadth of what, you know, Japan had in terms of genre and styles and all sorts of different things. And then once I finished school and I started working, my background's in animation. I actually started working in classical animation. I got back into superheroes. It's like all came back full circle. The Authority had just come out, and you know, comics were going through this big, you know, kind of renaissance of new creators and big ideas. Guys like, you know, Warren Ellis and Bendis and all those guys were doing some really wild stuff, and it kind of piqued my interest, and I started digging back into the superhero thing. And so that was a really fun time to kind of dig back into the world of comics and you know, eventually find my way into them, obviously working, you know, while I was trying to find my own kind of creative voice and things like that. So it's been a really, as a fan, I've taken in tons and tons of comics. I've read tons and tons of different material, and all of it kind of informs my stuff in different ways, you know?
So you're reading, I'm going to guess, just based off of the time period, you're reading some of John Byrne's Fantastic Four, right?
Oh yeah, like we're talking middle of the 80s. My brother and I were, you know, John Byrne Fantastic Four. We were reading the Bob Layton Iron Man stuff, and like I was collecting Spider-Man all the way from the early 230s all the way up to like 390, 400. So all the way through, you know, the real seminal, the Hobgoblin storyline, the original Hobgoblin storyline, and then up through the McFarlane issues, and Eric Larson comes on board and all that kind of stuff. Like that was just a magical period for comics, you know. And my brother's very first issue of X-Men was 141, which is Days of Future Past, which of course makes no sense when you come on board. You're like, what is this thing?
You know, it's funny. That was my first storyline too.
That was so wild.
My friend Dan was like, "Hey, read this." I was like, "What the hell is this?"
I don't even know who these characters are. Yeah, and they're all getting murdered.
Album. I was like, "I don't know about this," and I read it. I was like, "Oh, this shit's pretty good."
yeah, it was great. It was really, you know, and so we would both be trying to buy back issues while we were buying the new monthly issues. So you were sort of reading backwards and forwards at the same time. You're sort of filling in your knowledge pool of who these characters are and the adventures they've gone on. You know what I mean? And that was a lot of fun. There were other books I really liked, like Marvel Team Up and Marvel 2-in-1, because it was like the Thing or Spider-Man just teamed up with a grab bag of characters. And so every issue was like someone I didn't know and some new adventure, someone, little piece kind of unearthed from the Marvel universe that I could really enjoy. And that was a lot of fun for me. Yeah.
So when did you notice that, oh, people write these?
Right. That is the big transition. Like you have a moment where I think almost all of us, if you collect when you're young in particular, but sometimes I think when you're older, it's about the characters, or it's about their story. It's about the ongoing drama and soap opera. And then at some point, some little switch flips and you go, I like these stories better than those ones. And that's the art, and that's the writing and the combination therein. And then you start to seek out specific creators over even the characters themselves. And so that's when you definitely have those big kind of turns mentally where you're like, oh, I don't just like the X-Men. I like Chris Claremont's X-Men, or I like the way Paul Smith draws the X-Men, or I like, you know, John Byrne's Fantastic Four, or whatever, you know, Ann Nesenti's Daredevil, like whatever it is, that switch goes off in your mind and you're like, I want more of this stuff. You know what I mean? And you start to realize the bigger kind of tapestry of creation that's going on. And in some ways you peek behind the curtain and you realize that this isn't all perfectly planned out, that it's people's creative ideas that they're injecting into this all the time. And some of it works and some of it doesn't. And, you know, the universe continues onward. And that's a really exciting, you know, kind of time in terms of that collecting. And I get obviously really nostalgic about it still. But it changes the way you start to look at the stuff, and you start to sort of want to know more and more about the process, how it's made and who's behind it and what's going into the, you know, the creativity and the good and the bad of it. And I think that that's a really fun kind of part of the collecting as well. Absolutely.
So much.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go to the next question. The next question is No Surrender, No Road Home. Holy shit, that book was bonkers, dude. It's like a chess match, dude.
Yeah.
It's a weird game that like these people, I think there was like an actual line. I think it might have been from Jane Foster who said, "This isn't a game. This is people's lives."
Yeah. Yeah. Both those projects were really, really special to work on. You know, the No Surrender book was a weekly release
Mhm.
on it. And it was, I mean, both of them were weekly, you know, 16 weeks and 10 weeks. And so we built them out in advance in a big, big way, in a way that most comics aren't actually made nowadays. Like a lot of the monthly grind, you know, you're working whatever, 5-6 months ahead of schedule. We were over a year ahead of schedule because we had to build out, well, I say ahead of schedule, on schedule, because you had to, when the books start coming out weekly, all that buffer that you've built up just goes away, just vanishes in an instant, you know, because the artists are taking 4 to 6 weeks to draw each issue. And so you have to have all that script ahead of time. And so we did carefully plan it out like a chess match. Like for both projects, I flew to New York and we met in the Marvel boardroom.
Nice.
And hashed it all out. So it was me, Mark Waid, Al Ewing, you know, Tom Brevoort, and the rest of our editorial team.
Who's the editor?
Yeah, he's the Avengers, you know, group editor. And we sat around with the recipe cards and the Sharpies, and we started, you know, building the cast and what each of us were going to be doing. Now on No Surrender, it was interesting because each of us was an Avengers writer. Al Ewing was writing US Avengers. Mark was writing the flagship, you know, Avengers book, and I was writing Uncanny Avengers. And so that was the impetus to bring us all together, was all 3 Avengers books were going to collapse into one, you know, event. And then out of that, we were going to wrap it up and Jason Aaron was going to take over Avengers. And so it was our goal. The only thing they told us was, you know, don't use Jason's cast. So you can't use Iron Man, you can't use Thor, you can't use Cap. You know, we were just like, oh my God. But we had huge casts of other characters already at our disposal.
Too, because people sort of saw it as like the B level Avengers coming in showing their worth.
Well, I think what was so fun about it was, like, to me, like, I know that people put them in tiers or whatever. Every character, when you're writing them, is an A-tier character because they're so important to you and they're so important to the readers. And so to me, it's all about how can I make this cast as compelling as possible. You know, the Uncanny Avengers, they're not the B-listers. They are a really cool, dynamic team that I'm trying to make work. You know what I mean? And they come from such disparate backgrounds. And some of these characters have been around. Like I had Wasp, you know, Janet Van Dyne on my team. She's literally been around since Avengers, you know, the first issue. And what does that give you in terms of legacy and all this kind of stuff? And that ended up being kind of the touchstone for the whole series, was this idea of legacy, because a character like Living Lightning, who has never really gotten a fair shot as a character, ends up having to prove himself right alongside, you know, Jane Foster, Thor, or you know, Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver, or any of those characters. And that was a really fun aspect of it. And not just writing my own team, but mixing and matching characters from US Avengers and from the flagship book into this big, sprawling, you know, save the world style classic superhero story.
And it was cool because we also got to see some of the X-Men involved, like Rogue. And it's like, it's really cool because like 10 years ago, we probably wouldn't have been able to see that. But because of Hickman and Bendis of their Avengers world, that anyone could be an Avenger,
right,
we got to see anyone be an Avenger. It was awesome.
Yeah, it was such a sprawling cast, and it was a lot to organize. Like we actually had spreadsheets of where characters were at different points of the story and what they were doing, because we had multiple locations, multiple casts, and then multiple writers and artists. And so, you know, you're trying to keep all this stuff in check. And we were writing it kind of out of order, in a sense. Like we were writing scripts in order, but the artists were tackling different issues at different times. And so whenever we had a location, whichever artist got to that location first, whether it was in the first issue or the 9th issue or whatever, that became the design that we would put into our reference file, and then the other artists would follow it. So like if you know, Pepe Larraz is the first to draw a location, then that's what Paco Medina is going to use, even if technically his chapter comes earlier. You know, it was just like, it was a real kind of a delicate dance as we were going through. If a character gets injured, we got to make sure that injury looks the same across the whole story, even if someone is drawing a later chapter before that injury has been drawn, like weird stuff like that. So it was a wild ride and a lot of fun too. And it went so well, and we were able to deliver on the potential of it, that literally the week that the final issue shipped, we got a really nice round of congratulations from Tom and the team. And
Nice.
Tom asked if we would be up for doing it again, and that's when we said, yep, okay, we're down. And, a few months later, we're back in the room planning out what will become No Road Home. And the big nugget there was, Tom said, hey, this hasn't been announced publicly, but Marvel's going to get Conan the Barbarian. Are you guys interested in, we would like you to incorporate the character. And my first thought was, oh man, how's that going to work? I don't know if this is a good idea. And then I got kind of like possessive, and I was like, well, if we're going to someone's going to do it. At least I know I can do Conan well. So I will, grab hold of this piece and try and make this cool.
You and Al were the first person to bring Conan into the Marvel universe.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. The funny thing is that I went into that meeting thinking that everyone would want to write Conan really bad. And so I it felt like a legal case. Like I was going to prove I was the guy who should write most of the Conan stuff. And so I was super, super wound up, like, okay, I'm going to prove to them I'm the Conan guy. And both Mark and Al had already decided that was no problem, but I didn't know that. So I come into the meeting and I'm like, all right, so Conan, look, I don't want to be too possessive, but I know a lot about this character. And Mark is like, that's fine. You can do the Conan stuff. And I was like, what? And then Al Ewing goes, oh, I like the Conan's great, but clearly you're the expert. And I was just like, what? I want you guys to fight me. Like I got to prove I'm the guy. I got all this stuff here. And they just let me have it. I felt like it was cheating or something. It was great.
I heard Jason sent out a email to everyone going, I get the main title. No one can try.
It wasn't quite like that, but we all knew that Jason was a huge, Conan fan, and he's, such a incredible writer, and it just made sense for him to launch the book. Absolutely, and I'm really thrilled with the run that he did. Those 12 issues are a lot of fun, and he's been cranking away on the King Conan stuff. And it's looking amazing. There's just some really, really sharp stuff. And I didn't know that Jason was only going to do 12 issues on the main title. I just assumed he was going to stay for years, like he did on Thor or something like that. So in my head, I didn't plan to take over Conan the Barbarian. That's the honest truth. I wanted to write the character really bad. And then Jerry, came out with the Savage Avengers, and I was like, crap, man, everyone's going to get to do Conan after this but me. I don't know what I'm going to do. And I talked to Mark, the editor, and I said, look, I just want to write like a Savage Sword story, like a two-parter or a three-parter, and get it out of my head. I have this Conan story I've been wanting to tell for years. It's been sitting in my brain. I just got to get it out. I pitched the idea to Mark. He liked it a lot. Took it to Conan Properties. They approved it. And I got to do this 3-part Conan story called Conan the Gambler for Savage Sword last year. And honestly, what's that?
Alex Ross on the art too. I mean, on the cover.
No, not on the Gambler. No, that was a different one you're thinking. You think that first one was a Jerry Dugan story. It was mine was after that. So
okay.
But yeah, it's this 3-part story I did. Pat Zerker did the interior art on it. We had a ton of fun. And that was kind of my mic drop. That was like, this is what I think a Conan story should be. Like, I think this is how it works. And I intended for that to be like, this is, I got to write a cool Conan solo story, and that was what I wanted to do. And what I didn't know is behind the scenes, Jason was getting ready to wrap up his run, and they were already thinking about, who was going to come next. And then I came in and dropped this like very distinctive, confident Conan story. And the Conan Properties people and Mark, my editor, basically said, okay, Jim's the guy. And so they offered me the book. And at that point in time, I was co-writing Iron Man with Dan Slott. And my schedule was really, really tight. And all of a sudden they came at me and they said, hey, do you want to take over Conan the Barbarian? Of course. So I had to make the tough choice. And I said, look, Dan, this is a dream book for me, like bucket list kind of stuff. I'm going to step away from Iron Man and just focus all my attention to make this as special as possible. And that's what I've been doing. We've had a big bump in the publishing schedule because of the pandemic stuff, but even still, working on the main monthly title of Conan has been an absolute joy. And the artists that we've had working on it have been amazing. And I'm super pumped for people to see what we have coming in the months ahead, because it is going to be wild. So, yeah.
That was leading into the Conan. It was perfectly flawless. But the question I wanted to ask about it, though, was Jason Aaron is one of the best modern writers of all time.
Yes, it's true.
Was there this oh fuck, I gotta follow Jason?
Weirdly, I was less worried about following Jason than just the shadow that Conan and Robert E. Howard cast. You know what I mean? Like, Conan is bigger than Jason, bigger than me, bigger than Roy Thomas, who is the classic Conan, comic writer. Conan is one of the greatest literary characters. He kind of, pioneered the sword and sorcery genre in a lot of ways. And so I feel a great weight to just telling new stories with that character as a whole. To me, that character feels like a Spider-Man or a Batman or it's that level of pop culture sensibility. In almost any country in the world, you can say Conan the Barbarian and people know who that is, and that means a lot to me. And so to be in charge of that, for a time, and to run with that was the big pressure I was feeling. Jason's amazing, obviously. And I looked at his run and I was like, man, that is so awesome. And so I'm intimidated on that level, but more of it was also my own kind of love of the character and love of those stories that I read growing up and the comics that I read growing up. And, the Kurt Busiek and Carrie Nord stuff, like a lot of killer teams have come on board Conan over the years and put a stamp on it. And it was like, what is my stamp? And what are people going to think of it when it's done? And what am I going to think of it when it's done? Telling the best stories that I can and making them as visceral and enjoyable and engaging as I can. That's the job always. But now with this kind of a higher profile title, it's that much more so. And it can lead you to doubt your instincts. It can lead you to worry about when and where, your judgment is falling. And so you've got to kind of, as much as possible, I try and reread some of my favorites, or I reread the books and recenter myself on, okay, this is what the character is all about. This is what I think is most important, and if I'm wrong, the editor or Conan Properties tell me, but otherwise I got to put full steam ahead, because that's how you're going to get the best stories. Yeah.
So I want to ask you, you write Dungeons and Dragons.
I do. Yeah. It's crazy when you think about the fact that, honestly, Dungeons and Dragons and Conan the Barbarian are probably two of the most recognizable properties in fantasy. And I'm writing them at the same damn time, which pinch me. It's amazing. It's one of the coolest, things I could have ever imagined in terms of my career.
That connects.
Sure.
My father, when he was growing up, went to military school, and his roommate was Luke Gygax.
Oh, nice.
And yeah, okay, I knew you'd connect. Okay, this was pre Dungeons and Dragons.
Sure.
And so Gary would come over with beginner packs of what they're thinking about.
Yep.
And so my dad and Luke were the beta testers of the game.
Oh, that's great.
And my dad goes, fuck, I wish I got paid for that.
I mean, no one could have known, the heights that it would come to in terms of Dungeons and Dragons and its massive effect on pop culture, and it's incredible to me now how big D&D is. It went through a big boom in the 80s and then kind of dipped down in the 90s and into the 2000s and really ebbed and flowed out to a point where it was okay, it sort of had its day. And now, since 5th edition launched in 2014, Dungeons and Dragons is bigger now than it has ever been. It is massive. And I'm thrilled to be, a very small part of it and to be involved with that team and working with them on multiple projects. I'm doing the official comics. I've done a bunch of the crossover comics, like the Rick and Morty versus D&D and the recent Stranger Things and Dungeons and Dragons that I co-wrote. I'm doing this line of books called the Young Adventurers Guides, which are sort of teaching people how role-playing games work and bringing them in the door. And then I'm also doing other consulting with Wizards of the Coast on D&D. So like talking about other media stuff, and they treat me really well in terms of they want to know what I think, and they're excited about the stories that I have to tell, and how we could, flesh those out in different ways. And so
with their movies that they come out with,
I can't really say what we're working on. All kinds of cool stuff.
I didn't mean that. I mean,
yeah, it's exciting. It's really, again, like pinch me kind of stuff where, as a kid, D&D was my absolute favorite game. And my brother and I played like crazy. And it had a huge effect on me as a storyteller and me as an entertainer and wanting to do this stuff for a living. And now to be, whatever you want to call it, working with the mothership, like actively involved with it on a week by week basis is, it's utterly surreal, to be honest with you, in all the right kind of ways, and really cool conversations and really cool future plans. And that crew over there is so passionate about what they do, and to see the success that it's having, it's just great. It's so great. And the fact is, it's not just great for the books. It's like, the whole point of D&D is to play the game and to engage with your friends and family, right? And so to see people finding, escapism and confidence through the game is the best. It's the best thing you could ask for.
I have to ask though.
Sure.
Do you write Dungeons and Dragons as if you were a dungeon master?
I don't. So people always ask me, they're like, do you roll dice for the stories and all this stuff? And it's like, my job is to create the feeling of a game that's unfolding before your eyes. And I use the rules in the canon that's established so that anything that happens in the story could happen in a D&D session. But because I'm building a narrative, I have all the benefits of rolling a natural 20 whenever I want, or having a character fail when I want, or things like that. What I do to try and make it feel like D&D is the characters are a little bit more spontaneous, and a little bit, the stories take severe turns a little more quickly than I would with a superhero story. And the reason why is because that to me feels like D&D. When you're at the table and someone makes a wild roll, you're like, whoop, it's all up in the air now. Shit's going this way. And so that's how I kind of inject a bit of D&D-ness into the comics or into the other stories that I tell, is that the characters are a little freer, let's say, to get themselves into deep, deep trouble in an instant. Because that feels like playing the game.
So you are a teacher in Toronto.
Yeah, I'm a prof. Yeah.
How the hell do you balance between Marvel, Wizards of the Coast, all this stuff, and teaching?
My wife is very patient. We're very methodical. We don't have any kids and we don't have any pets, which makes a big difference in terms of time spent. So it's like a very, very long schedule. Most days or weekdays or weekends, I wake up early, I'm on email, grab a cup of tea with my wife, and then go back upstairs, and then I'm jumping on for my classes, doing my lectures. After the lectures are over, students are sending me work to get feedback on. I'm responding to them as quickly as I can, jumping on conference calls with my editors or sending emails back and forth. I've gotten into a process of, I've got a very strict calendar and a strict writing schedule where it's like, okay, I've got to get this many pages scripted today. I got to get this outline done. And the fear of falling behind is probably my most powerful motivator, because you have, artists that are relying on you. You have
a writer's best friend is a deadline,
right? And so you are pushing yourself to produce. And the writer's block and the fears that I feel are still, there, but at some point you just have to push past it because other people are relying on you, and you've got to get this thing going. And I'm at a point now where, I still have those moments of, oh man, I suck. Oh man, I can't do this. But because I've come through the other side so many times and got stuff done, it's now instead this weird feeling of, oh, this is the part of the process where I feel like I suck, instead of I suck. You know what I mean? I go, oh, right. I thought I could get away with not feeling it this time, but I still do. Fight on. You know what I mean?
And that led into that. You just so happen to say the two magic words that leads into the next question: writer's block.
Yeah, man.
See, how do you get past that?
So for me, it is honestly about constantly reconnecting to the research material that I do, or reading, the source material, right? So Conan's perfect example, Robert E. Howard or whatever. I will write down, core themes or core ideas or the core sort of spine of my story. And I'm like, if I'm not motivated right now to write this section, it's because something has fallen off. I'm no longer on that path. I'm a pretty strict planner. There are different types of writers. There are what we call planners and pantsers, people writing by the seat of their pants, and then eventually a story will form, and other people who plan a story and then they build it very carefully. I think it's important to have spontaneity and to realize that your ideas can change, but I need a structure underneath in order for me to complete things. So I build a pretty tight outline. And then during a story, sometimes I'll realize I have to change it. And that's cool because at least I have the plan underneath, the safety net of I know where this is going to go no matter what. And then I go, oh, but this is even better. And then I can sort of shift gears if I need to get that more out of that story. And so for me, the plan is a big part of why I can minimize writer's block, because if I don't know where the story's going, or if I feel like I've lost my way, that's when I tend to slow down. That's when I tend to stall. And because I have a plan, usually before I sit down to script any of the book, I rarely have that. Sometimes I'll be frustrated with the way a section's coming together, or the dialogue isn't crackling enough or whatnot, but I can punch through that. I can sort of keep pushing, and know that I'm going to get through page by page, grind by grind. The other advantage you have with comics is that, the artist is going to get their say in terms of how those panels come together on the page. And until I see that art, I have dialogue that's there, and most of it will stick, but I can still make adjustments. We still have a little bit of leeway once I see that art to go, no, this is what's going to, marry itself best with what we've got there.
So say you have a tight section, and it's
right.
like fully planned out. You just can't figure out that opening scene. Like you have like a few panels, probably a page or so, and then go, oh shit, I don't know where to go from here.
Sure. It's, again, I'll even do like a breakdown of page pacing. So I don't just write a script. I'll break it down. If I've got a 20-page issue, I'm going to say, okay, the first 4 pages take place here, and this is what needs to happen on these pages. And I know that when a page turn happens, that's one of the sort of unique mechanics of comics. When you turn a new page, you can reveal something, you can have a big moment, or you can do a scene change, or you can do whatever. So I'll try and build my surprises or build those big moments into those scene changes with the page turn. And so that can be another thing where I'm like, oh, I'm clearly spinning my wheels for a page turn. I need to make this more interesting, or I need to add more oomph to it, or let's build more action into this thing. And those are the ways that I kind of fill in the gaps. As much as possible. There's also a time when I will get through a draft of a script and I'm like, this is acceptable, I could hand this thing in, but in an ideal world, I've got another day or day and a half to just kind of leave it for 5, 6, 8 hours, come back to it with a fresh set of eyeballs and go, does this still work? Does this still crackle? Do I still like it? You know what I mean?
Right.
And that's when you can make some kind of crucial little, polishing and adjustments. Yeah.
All right. So writing with a co-writer, because I know you write alone most of your books, but is it more fun to write when you have like a co-writer with you?
It just depends on the co-writer. Like I've done a bunch of co-written projects. So, Rick and Morty versus D&D and Stranger Things and Dungeons and Dragons, did Iron Man with Dan Slott, Avengers, the weeklies, a bunch of different projects. And each of them had their own challenges. Like, you want writers who work well together, but it's also helpful to have people that tackle problems in different ways, because then you're bringing your heads together to solve things, that much more creatively. Mark and Al and I really jived well. I was kind of a structure junkie. Mark is such an old hand and an experienced, veteran. He can write his way out of any problem, no problem. He's just seen every permutation, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And Al, Al is a big continuity nerd and loves going with the big cosmic ideas and the big picture kind of crazy. And so it would be this thing where Al would have this wild big idea, and then I would sort of rope it into a structure, or I would try and fit it into the page count or whatever. And then I would get stuck somewhere and Mark would go, "Oh, that's easy. You solve it like this." And we'd be like, "Wow, how did we figure this thing out?" It's like this puzzle we're constantly shifting and moving. I love writing action scenes. Mark hates writing big, action scenes. And we had some of the biggest in No Surrender, where you were having 10, 12 characters in this ballet of battle where people are just crashing into each other. And so Mark would be like, "I have no interest in writing 12 characters fighting over 6 pages." And I'm like, I want to do that. I love coming up with creative uses of people's powers when they're fighting and all that stuff. And he was like, just pushing it all my way. You take it. I could not care less, And that was a fun way to sort of fill in the gaps. That was a fun way that we could build on each other's strengths, and do the kind of stuff that we wanted to do. In No Road Home, obviously, I took a big chunk of the Conan stuff. And some of the other characters that I really, really liked. I did a bunch of the vision scenes and things like that. So it was just, it was a really cool process, particularly No Road Home, because like on No Surrender, I came in, I was so nervous because I felt like, man, I'm the low man on the totem pole. I'm the least well-known of these 3 writers.
This guy wrote Kingdom Come.
Yeah, like, how am I going to keep up with them? And then once we got, midway through, I was like, okay, I'm holding my own. Like I am a valuable part of this process. They're not dragging me along. So when we sat down to make the sequel, it really did feel like Three Musketeers or something. Like, we all come together. We're going to do this thing. We know we can do it. Now we're just going to do it again and have that much more fun doing it, because it's a proven, process in that way. Yeah.
My dad's in the chat, goes, "Did you tell him I was in military?" I was like, "Yes, I did."
Nice.
So, okay, we're gonna wrap up soon.
No worries.
Let's do a couple questions.
Sure.
Ed Brewer says, "Let's go. There you go. Are co-writers equal partners, or does one tend to take the lead?"
Again, I think it really just depends on the project. It's really hard to put a one size fits all on any kind of co-writing or any kind of project. There were times when there were issues of Avengers where one writer was clearly, defining that whole section of the story. And there were other times where it was me, or it was Al, or it was Mark. Same thing with, when Gail, Simone, and I did the Conan Red Sonja miniseries, she would tend to write the Red Sonja sections, but every so often I would come in with an idea, or vice versa. And that was the whole point of the thing, is that collaborative, idea. On Iron Man, Dan had already built out the story and knew where it was going. So it was more about me helping him to execute on that stuff, rather than it being like me generating material. Every so often I would help bridge an area, or he would be like, "We need to get over here." And I would be like, "Oh, I know how to get us there. That's no problem." Or, "We can solve this in dialogue," or whatever. But most of it was sort of like Dan had been there already on the book, and I was coming in later. So it was like he had the architecture already sort of figured out, and it was my job to like make it pretty, make it fit well. So every project's different. Pat Rothfuss on Rick and Morty D&D, he had big picture crazy ideas, but he also didn't know how to write comics. So he would send me these massive documents full of stuff, and I was like, some of this does not fit in a comic. Like, you literally, there's too much text here, or there's too many things happening at the same time. Each panel is one moment of action, and you've written 30 different actions here for a 2-page sequence. Like, that's just not going to function. So how can we use the essence of that and deliver on its potential, but in a way that speaks as a comic? You know what I mean? Just stuff like that. So, and then I've got huge passions when it comes to Dungeons and Dragons. So I made it very clear, like, I need this to be in the story, or this moment would mean a lot to me. And then Pat would be like, "Oh, we can build on that in these cool ways." And so we had this wild kind of creative process where he was just like, it was a fire hose of ideas that we were putting down so fast, and then desperately trying to structure it for poor Troy and Leo, to do the art on. And Troy's like one of the best cartoonists in the business. And he would take stuff that even I was like, man, I would not wish this upon my worst enemy to draw. And he would somehow make it look effortless, and those are the kinds of collaborators that are just, casting gold. You can't imagine.
I had Phil Hester on last week, and he said when you look for like a writer or you're assigned a writer, try not to think of him as like a second hand, but as like a collaborator.
Absolutely. And that's why one of the things I want when I'm working on a project is to know who I'm working with ahead of time. It can be hard to write a script in a vacuum. If you're just writing a script that's going to go to, fill in the blank artist, you can't play to their strengths. You can't give them something they've always wanted to draw. You can't get them excited as easily. You know what I mean? Literally yesterday, Corey Smith and I jumped on a call. He's the ongoing artist for Conan. His first issue is in January, and he is doing phenomenal work. I cannot brag enough about how amazing the book looks. And it feels like, we had this bump because of COVID and everything else. January feels like a fresh start. Like we're going to get a chance. People are going to get to jump on this book and really see the potential of it in a way that I feel like we haven't quite had our fair shake because of all the schedule hiccups. And Corey's doing the best pages he has ever created. He is having an absolute ball. We are super in sync. And I said to him, I'm like, A, I don't want this run to ever end. And B, like when it does, I want to stick with you and keep making comics because you are so great. And I just feel like our sensibilities are so much, in the same wavelength. And he agreed. And it was just like such a cool conversation because I could tell him verbally, like, here's where the story's going. Here's the stuff I'm laying down right now. What about that excites you? What about that gets you pumped? Because I want to deliver on that potential. And I just want to make sure you're happy. You know what I mean? And he was like, well, these are the things I love to draw. And this stuff I think is cool. And this is what, gets me pumped about Conan. And it's like, no problem. Great. Now, as I'm writing the future scripts, I've got that in the back of my mind all the time. Like, oh man, this is a big piece of red meat. He's just going to bite into it. This is going to be awesome. Those are the kinds of interactions and collaborations that I live for. That's the reason why I write comics. It's not just about my way or the highway. It's not like I am the writer and you must put my words to the page. It is like we are making something really cool. And when this is all said and done, I want everyone on the team to be proud of it, And the way that we find the best final product is to all feel like we have a part of it, And I might be the start of that process because I'm generating a story. But that is by no means make me in charge, Yeah.
So Lord says, what's the difference between mage, sorcerer, warlock, and wizard?
What are the difference? Or
what's the difference?
It says like the difference. Yeah, I mean there are different ways to do magic in Dungeons and Dragons, right? So some of those are divine, like you're praying to a god, or some of them are making deals with things like with the warlock. Some of it's spontaneous magic that comes from some other source, like a sorcerer, and then wizard is like intense study and finding the formulas and finding the processes. Of the four of those, I would probably say I'm probably closest to the wizard in the sense that I feel like I'm constantly studying and that it doesn't necessarily come easy for me, but I will outlast you. I will work harder than the other person. I will be on time and I'll be on schedule and I'll do the homework to make sure that this thing is as strong as it can be. And in the end, if it doesn't come easy for you, because of talent or whatever, I'll still keep going. So I was sort of like the tortoise, slowly moving along there. Yeah.
How important is maintaining canon and established characters?
I think there's obviously core, traits of these characters that matter. The toughest balance is, I talk about this at length with so many of my friends, that you need to have those core elements in order for the character to be recognizable. And yet, the most celebrated and seminal comic book stories of these superheroes in particular are the ones where they have severely shaken up the status quo. Right. So, in the moment that someone is making these stories, most of the time the readership is tense and freaking out because they're like, how could you do fill in the blank, right?
Yeah.
How could you kill Jean Grey? How could you,
Well, that was a big step back in
right,
the day.
right. How could you, change Spider-Man's costume? How could you, bring back Bucky? Like any of these things. And those are the stories that really shock people and impress them. If you tell the best by the numbers Spider-Man story, people might respect it on a base level, but it probably won't stick with them emotionally. You know what I mean? And so the tough balancing act is trying to stay true to what a character is, while also being creative enough and being experimental enough to take risks. And not all of those stories are going to work. And you have to be able to accept that they can't always work. And the readership may not accept what's going on. And it may not become the big milestone moment that you always hoped that will forever define that character. But if you don't try, if you don't push, then you'll never get those moments. You'll never get those highs. You know what I mean? And so I have a very different view of this kind of stuff. As a fan and a reader, I would read this and, fill in the blank writer has done some crazy thing. And I would be like, how could they? How could they not get this character right? I would never do whatever. And now I have a much different view of it where I'm like, you know what? Maybe that story didn't work, or maybe it didn't stick, but they tried something cool, or they were pushing the envelope to try and get some real meaty piece of material that would stick around. You know what I mean? And I have a lot more respect for that now. And it makes me want to be bolder about the kinds of stories that I tell. So yeah.
So say you change something drastically.
Sure.
The greatest part about a great part about comics for the creative side is that it comes out fairly quickly from when you come up with the idea.
Yeah, compared to a lot of other mediums, that's one of the fascinating things about comics. Like, creating a movie or animation or a video game, can be a years-long process. And we're turning around a story in, months, 4 months, 5 months in most cases, from some version of conception to delivery. You know what I mean? And in some cases, you're doing lettering edits weeks before, a couple weeks before it's going to be in people's hands, which is kind of surreal. But it does mean you're getting a constant pulse from the readership, particularly with a monthly book. And I think it's important to hear what people are saying about a title, but also know that they are not seeing the forest for the trees. And I don't mean that as like a fans know nothing, because I don't think that's the case at all. Right. But just like if you have a long ongoing story and they're seeing part of it, they're going to see that current part and may assume the worst, or may assume, all kinds of things that you have a broader sense of the structure on. So you need to be able to look and go, okay, if they're freaking out because they think this is bad, or this is going to change everything, hey, they're invested in it. There's a reason why they're freaking out, is because they care about these characters and they care about the story that's being told. And that is a good thing. Is this criticism because they have not seen the ending? Or is this criticism because you are genuinely doing damage, to what this character is meant to be and should always be, and so on and so forth? And being able to recognize those different things, you know what I mean, is really important. And it's something that I think about a lot, and try to put myself into the heads of the readership and go, okay, I'm here for an entertaining yarn. I want to really knock you out with some fun stuff and surprise you. And the way to surprise you has got to be, pushing you outside your comfort zone a little bit and trying to make things bigger and broader and more dramatic,
Yeah.
Yeah. It's tough, particularly with the longest running characters. I did a Batman story quite a few years ago for Legends of the Dark Knight.
Oh, wow. That was a while ago.
It was a lot of fun to do, but it was one of the hardest projects I've ever worked on, because what is a good Batman story, and how do you do a good Batman story that doesn't just feel like 100 other Batman stories? And so for me, it was trying to work my way backward from a cool ending and a big moment, trying to build out a big surprise or a big kind of turn. And in some ways, Batman in this story was reactionary, that the villain was defining a bunch of the structure and Batman was pushing up against it. You know what I mean? And that was how I ended up sort of finding my way through it, because I was never going to be able to tell a story where we changed Batman in some severe way. That wasn't the point. That wasn't what we were trying to do, and so it's sort of like you're loading up, as much of your creative ideas as you can to unleash them in these really potent ways. And with the big characters, you may not get very many shots. So you've got to decide very, like laser focus. What am I doing here? And what am I trying to communicate?
The best part about Batman is, I think Bendis or Snyder said this. No matter what story you tell with Batman, you'll always find a piece of Batman in the story because he can be in any genre.
Well, that's the thing, is the biggest characters are larger than the book. You know what I mean? They are cast their shadow on pop culture as a whole. You kind of can't break them in most cases. They're you can be silly, you can be serious, you can be all kinds of different genres, even within superheroes, and somehow it still works. You know what I mean? That the Adam West Batman and the Frank Miller Batman can exist, that these are all permutations of a concept, a bigger idea, an idea about obsession and vengeance and all this other stuff. You know what I mean? And I think that's a really cool thing about it. You know what I mean? And so I think there are rules. It doesn't mean anything goes all the time. But like, I think, for example, okay, Conan the Barbarian is a perfect example. In the main Conan book, the monthly book, I believe it should be in the Hyborian age. We're not going to do crossovers with the Marvel universe. That Conan is, this survivor, and he's going to be true to himself as a character. And he's going to be, for the most part, pretty serious. But that doesn't mean nothing silly ever happens. It's just his reaction to it is going to be stoic and intense and whatever. But outside of that, if in Savage Avengers or Battle for the Serpent Crown, they've got him running around the Marvel universe and interacting with Black Panther and Spider-Man and Venom and all these characters. Cool, man. Like, whatever. That's places to experiment and have fun with these characters. That's a place to kind of go wild and throw everything against the wall and see what sticks. You're outside of the classic confines, and the character is big enough that he can take it. Like, just go buck and have fun and see what you can find, because you may find some new angle and some new permutation. You know what I mean? I'm protective of Conan the Barbarian, like the core title, because that feels like it's not just, it's the legacy of the character, that the character has been around for hundreds of issues and carries a certain amount of expectation on the back of that. You know what I mean? In the same way that I would write an issue of Amazing Spider-Man differently than I would write a Spider-Man miniseries, because I feel like Amazing Spider-Man is a standard bearer that carries the weight of its history behind it in all the best kind of ways, But if I was doing like an experimental kind of Spider-Man miniseries, you're like, well, if it doesn't work, that's okay. It's its own little mutant monster causing trouble over there, Yeah.
So I have a question for you, because you co-wrote Iron Man with Dan, and this is weird though, because he does the Marvel style of writing.
He does. Yes,
and you do. I'm assuming
I do full script. Yeah.
How does that even coexist in the same?
So essentially, in that case, it was a different kind of process, because Dan would be doing a structured outline, and then I would be coming in and basically tightening it up with a script. So he would say, here's all the things that need to happen in the issue. Sometimes he would lay them out very structured, like this happens, then this happens, then this happens. And I would go, that's 3 pages, that's 5 pages, that's 4. That's the transition. There's the big moment. Okay, I got it. And then I would script it. Other times, he would just sort of give me bullet points, like this is the main beats of the issue. This line of dialogue is super important, or this is a hearkening back to an earlier issue. So we got to make sure that really links up properly. And then I would do first pass on the script. And then we would both go through the tight script and make adjustments. Sometimes I would be adding panels, taking stuff away, changing lines of dialogue. So it was a pretty organic process, but I was kind of there structuring. Like, I was there to pull down the big wild idea and go, that's 3 pages, you know what I mean? Or that's the 2-page spread. Okay, got it. And that was sort of my place, was to staple down sort of those elements and then put them on the board and make them work, Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
No problem.
Real quick, my dad, who hates everything, says he's important. So that's
sweet.
Yeah. Okay. So thank you for stopping by. Everyone. Oh, well, there's Ryuk. He showed up late. I'll see you next week. I will be interviewing Wes from Thinking Critical on YouTube. And so show up there 9:30 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. So come have some fun. And thank you, Jim, for stopping by. Appreciate
My pleasure.
knowledge.
Thanks, man. Take care.
Have a